The morning sun hadn't quite cleared the pines yet when Robert noticed it. A piece of stiff, glossy paper, laminated like a restaurant menu, taped right to the wrought iron gate at the foot of their driveway. Not nailed. Not slipped under the door. Taped neatly, deliberately right at eye level, as if it had been waiting for him. He was on his way back from checking the bluebird box's habit. More than hope-hand, he slowed, squinting. His hands were still dusty from adjusting the nesting box on post number 3. Martha was inside, making coffee, humming something low and soft. The way she did when she thought no one was listening. He peeled the paper off carefully, like it might bite. The corners were slightly curled from the overnight dew. He turned it over. Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association official notice. Effective immediately, then in bold. No-nonsense font, all shoreline and lake. Access areas are designated as common property of the Willow Creek Estates HOA. Private docks. Moorings and shoreline structures must be registered and permitted annually, $750 fee. Unpermitted structures are subject to removal at owner's expense. First enforcement actions scheduled for June 30th. Robert read it twice. Then a third time, slower, his thumb rubbing the edge of the paper like he was trying to erase it. Their dock wasn't fancy. Rough-cut cedar, grayed by 20 years of sun and rain. A few boards had been replaced once, after a storm knocked a pine limb onto it. Once when the kids were little and jumped too hard near the end. Robert had built it himself, summer of '99, right after they'd moved in full-time. He remembered the smell of the sawdust mixing with lake water. Martha handing him nails from an old coffee can, their golden retriever, Sam. Nosing around the pilings like he was supervising. They'd never needed a permit. Not once. He walked back up the gravel path, the paper folded tight in his fist. The house sat just far enough back from the water that you didn't see the lake from the front porch, only the trees. The azaleas Martha coaxed into bloom every April, the stone path leading down to the water. But from the kitchen window, from the little bench on the side deck, you saw everything, the curve of the cove, the herons at dusk, the way the light hit the water in the late afternoon, turning it gold. Inside, the smell of coffee and toast hung in the air. Martha looked up from the counter. "What's that?" He handed it to her without a word. She read it. Her eyebrows lifted just a fraction, then settled into a line he knew well. Not anger. Not yet assessment. The same look she used to give student essays that tried too hard to sound smart, but missed the point entirely. "Well," she said, folding the notice neatly in half, then in half again. "That's new. Since when?" Robert asked, pouring himself a cup. His voice sounded rough, even to him. "Dunno. We didn't get an email. Or a letter. Just this," she tapped the folded square on the counter, "appeared like a parking ticket." They sat at the little table by the window, the one with the wobbly leg Robert had fixed 3 times with shims and hope. Outside, a squirrel scolded a jay from the oak branch. Normal, quiet, the way it always was. "Maybe it's a mistake," Robert said. But he didn't believe it. "Could be," Martha said. Though she didn't sound convinced either. Neither of them mentioned the real question hanging in the air. What do we do now? They decided to go to the meeting. The HOA meetings were held in the clubhouse, a low brick building near the entrance, with vinyl flooring and folding chairs and a coffee urn that always tasted like burnt socks. Robert and Martha usually skipped them. They weren't the type to argue over mulch color or street light placement. They paid their dues on time, kept their shrubs trimmed, waved at the occasional patrol cart. They figured that was enough. But this was different. The room was fuller than usual. 20, maybe 25 people. A few familiar faces, Frank from down the road, the couple with the sailboat. The woman who always brought homemade banana bread, not there tonight. Most sat stiffly, arms crossed or hands folded, like they were waiting for bad news at the front. A woman Robert recognized but couldn't name stood beside a projector screen. Mid-50s, sharp haircut, navy blazer. She introduced herself as the newly elected HOA president, something about continuity, fiscal responsibility, protecting property values. Her voice was calm, confident, rehearsed. Then she got to the lake. She clicked a remote. Up came a faded copy of the original 1985 subdivision plat, the one you could pull from the county website, pixelated and hard to read. She pointed to a shaded area around the water. As many of you know, she said, Willow Creek was designed as a true community. Shared spaces. Shared responsibility. The lake wasn't meant to be privatized. Look here, see this notation. Common area. That includes the entire lake body and all shoreline up to the high water mark. A murmur ran through the room. Robert leaned forward. That's not how it read when we bought in. She smiled politely. Covenants evolve. The board recently conducted a comprehensive title review, and based on the original developer's intent, RD plus years of HOA management, we've determined the lake belongs to all of us, not just the few with direct access. Then came the details, the permit system, the fees, the inspection schedule. Docks would be limited to 12 feet. No roofs, no permanent seating. All structures subject to removal if non-compliant. And enforcement, she added, begins June 30th. Robert raised his hand. She paused. Yes, our lot 42. We've had a dock there since '99. Never been told it wasn't allowed. Never charged a fee? Our deed says the property goes to the shoreline. We even paid extra in taxes, lakefront premium, they called it. Few heads turned. The president's expression didn't change. Deeds can be misleading. Covenants override conflicting language. And the HOA has maintained, insured, and managed the lake for decades. That establishes precedent. Maintained how? Someone called out water testing, invasive species control, safety patrols in summer, but you never owned it? Robert pressed. She hesitated just a beat, but he saw it. The legal ownership is clear in the association documents. We're happy to share the full file with any member. But the board's position is firm. This is about fairness, about preserving what makes Willow Creek special for everyone. The meeting ended shortly after. People filed out slowly, some talking in low voices, others silent. Robert and Martha lingered. Outside, the air had cooled. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass near the parking lot. Well, Martha said, slipping her hand into his. That was something. You're bluffing, he said. But his chest felt tight. Maybe, or maybe they just believed their own story. He thought about his uncle, the quiet, precise man who'd taught him how to read a compass before he could ride a bike. Harold had surveyed half the county back in the day. When he passed, he left Robert the land, the same 40,000 square feet of pines, and sloped down to the water with a handshake and a folded map in a manila envelope. It's yours, he'd said, voice thin but steady, all the way to where the water meets the land. Don't let anyone tell you different. Robert hadn't thought much about it at the time, just nodded. Thanked him. Buried the map in a file box with old tax returns and warranty deeds. But now it felt like a promise. Back home, while Martha washed the dinner dishes, Robert went to the garage. It smelled of motor oil, cedar shavings, and the faint sweetness of dried apples Martha stored in crates each fall. He moved the lawnmower, the stack of patio stones they'd meant to use for a garden path, the plastic bin of Christmas lights. Behind the shelves, tucked into the corner where the ceiling sloped low, sat an old green metal Locker Army surplus. Probably from the '60s. He hadn't opened it in years. The padlock was stiff. He worked it with his pocket knife, the blade catching in the rust. It gave with a soft click. Inside, a stack of spiral notebooks. A brass transit level in its case, a box of hand-sharpened pencils. And, at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine, just like Harold used to do a thick manila folder, Robert carried it inside. Brushing dust from his sleeves, Martha dried her hands on a towel and came over as he laid it on the kitchen table. What's that? The past, he said. He undid the twine, unfolded the oilcloth, and there it was. On top, a hand-drawn map, ink on linen-backed paper. Clearwater Lake, not as a blue blob, but with contour lines, depth marks, and tiny notations in neat, slanted script HW Mark 78, erosion zone, cedar stump good reference. Lot lines radiated out from the water, each labeled. Lot 42's boundary didn't stop at the tree line. It ran straight down, clean and certain, to a dotted curve labeled ORD, high water. Beneath it, a certified copy of the deed. Not the simplified version they'd gotten at closing. This one dated October 12, 1979. Signed by the developer and notarized, had an addendum. Initialed in blue ink, Lot 42 includes all land to the ordinary high water mark of Clearwater Lake, including riparian rights of access, use, and enjoyment. As recognized under state law, riparian rights. Robert remembered the term from a long-ago civics class. The right to use the water that touches your land. To build a dock, to fish. To sit quietly at dawn and watch the mist rise. He looked up at Martha. Her eyes were wide, not surprised. Not shocked, relieved, like she'd been holding her breath and finally let it out. They don't have a leg to stand on, she said softly. Then why? Robert asked. Tracing the line on the map with his finger. Do I feel like we're the ones standing on shaky ground? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into the folder and pulled out a small, leather-bound Ledger Herald's field book. Flipping to a page near the back, she pointed. There, in the same careful hand, October 17th, met with E. Langston, plat filing. He wants lake labeled common. Told him that's fine for use, but can't take title from owners. Law's clear. He agreed, said, covenant would handle access, not ownership. Filed plat without lake ownership transfer, made copy for file. Truth matters. HKH Robert read it twice. E. Langston, the same last name as the HOA president? Coincidence? Maybe or maybe not. They stayed up late that night, poring over the documents under the soft light of the kitchen lamp. The ink hadn't faded. The dates matched county records they quickly pulled up online. The language was plain, unambiguous. Their land went to the water, the lake itself. That was a different question. Nobody owned the water, just the land beneath it, up to a point. But the shoreline, the right to touch it, use it, care for it, that was theirs. Still, as Robert carried the folder back to the garage just before bed, he paused at the door. Down the slope, past the fire pit and the old oak swing, the lake lay dark and still. Moonlight silvered the surface. A fish jumped once, rippling the reflection of the stars. He thought about June 30, less than 10 weeks away. He thought about the dock, the one he'd built board by board, the one his granddaughter had learned to skip stones from, the one where he and Martha sat every Sunday morning with coffee and silence. And he thought about a laminated notice on a gate. It wasn't just about wood and nails, it was about belonging, about the quiet. Understanding that some things, land, water, memory, aren't meant to be managed by committees or monetized by fees. They're meant to be lived. The next morning, over scrambled eggs and weak coffee, Martha always made it too weak, and he never told her, Robert said. We should talk to someone. Not the HOA, Martha said. No, someone who knows the law. The real law. Not just what someone says it is. She nodded, pushed her plate aside, and Robert, yeah, if they come for that duck, they're not just coming for wood. He looked out the window. A blue heron stood motionless at the water's edge, one leg tucked, waiting. No, he said. They're not. He got up, rinsed his cup, and walked down to the lake. The dock creaked under his weight, the familiar, comforting groan of old wood settling. He ran his hand along the railing, feeling the smooth spots worn by years of Hans's, Martha's, the kids, the grandkids. He knelt at the near end where the support post met the water. The algae was thick this time of year. He scraped a bit away with his thumbnail. There, just below the surface, carved deep into the cedar, almost hidden 2 letters and a date. HKH minus 1979. Herald's mark, a surveyor's signature, not a claim, a confirmation. Robert sat down on the top step, the sun warm on his back. And for the first time in 2 days, he took a full, Deep breath. They weren't going to back down, but they weren't going to charge in. Either they were going to be careful, they were going to be right, and most of all, were going to be ready. Because sometimes, the most ordinary things the dock, the deed, the quiet morning by the water are the ones worth standing for. And sometimes, the truth doesn't shout, it just waits, patient, certain, like a line drawn long ago on a map. Still true? Still there? Still theirs? The folder stayed on the kitchen table for 3 days. Not because they ignored it. Because they kept coming back to it morning coffee, after dinner tea. Late night worries, like it was a compass they needed to check again and again. Just to be sure, it still pointed north. Martha photocopied everything. Not at the library, they didn't want curious eyes or idle chatter, so she drove 20 miles to the next town, to a quiet copy shop run by a retired school librarian who never asked questions. Jess smiled and handed back the stack with a paperclip and a wink. Robert, meanwhile, started walking, not just down to the dock, but around it. Along the shore of the cove, where the trees leaned in like they were listening, he measured roughly with his own stride. He knew from years of gardening that his pace was about 2.5 feet. From the big sycamore at the north edge of their lot to the bend where the water pooled deeper, 43 paces. Just like the deed said. 107.5 feet of frontage. He looked for signs. Not just in the documents, but in the land itself. The old stone wall, half buried in ivy near the property line. Harold had mentioned it in the field notes reference point. Dry-laid stone, 1880s. Likely farm boundary. Robert cleared the vines. There it was. Mossy, cracked, but unmistakable, and the iron pin. The one Harold had driven in 1979, stamped with the county surveyor's mark. Robert remembered helping him that day holding the mallet, squinting in the sun, the thunk as the steel bit into clay. He hadn't been back to it in years. Brambles had swallowed it nearly whole. But he found it, brushed off the dirt. The numbers were still sharp. WC-42-S. Willow Creek, Lot 42, South Corner. He took a photo with his phone, not for proof, just for himself. A small, stubborn fact in a world starting to feel slippery. They didn't talk about lawyers yet. Not out loud. But they both knew it was coming. One afternoon, while Martha was deadheading the roses, a pickup pulled into the drive, not the HOA patrol cart, but an older Ford, clean but well used, with a fishing rod in the back window and a faded bumper. Sticker that read, "Ask me about property. Law, but keep it simple." The man who stepped out looked like he belonged in a flannel shirt and work boots, which he was wearing. Late 50s, salt and pepper beard, kind eyes, no briefcase, just a canvas satchel slung over his shoulder. He introduced himself as someone who'd lived in the county most of his life, handled land disputes for going on 30 years, and importantly knew Harold. Not well, but enough. Sat next to him at a zoning hearing in 91, he said, smiling faintly. Man could recite survey statutes like poetry. Never raised his voice. Never had to. They sat on the porch Martha brought out, lemonade in tall glasses with condensation beating down the sides, and Robert laid it all out. The notice. The meeting. The deed. The field notes. The coincidence of the last name. The man listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't nod too eagerly. Just leaned back in the rocking chair, fingers laced over his stomach, watching the trees sway. When Robert finished, there was a long pause. A blue jay scolded from the oak. Then he said, "Let me see the deed again." He read it slowly. Turned the page. Checked the notary stamp. Ran his thumb over the initialed addendum. Then he looked up. "The HOA can make rules," he said. "About noise, about paint colors, even about how far a dock can stick out within reason. They can ask folks to chip in for lake cleanup or safety buoys. That's cooperation. That's community." He set the paper down carefully. "But they can't take what was never theirs to begin with. A covenant, no matter how many folks signed it later, can't wipe out a property right that was recorded before the HOA even existed. Not in this state. Not anywhere I know of." He paused. especially not when the county's been taxing you for lakefront all this time. That's not just paperwork. That's the government saying, this is your land. We see it. We value it, Martha exhaled. It wasn't relief, not yet. But it was weight shifting. Like a door that had been stuck, suddenly gave a little. What do they have? She asked. Probably nothing, he said. Or more likely they have assumption. Someone years ago said the lake's common, and everyone nodded and moved on. No one checked the records. No one asked common how. Owned by whom? He tapped the deed. This is fact. Paper and ink and law. Assumption doesn't stand up to that. He didn't push them to sue. Didn't talk about courtrooms or depositions. Just said hold on to this. Keep it safe. And don't let them rush you. Fear works fast. Truth works slow, but it sticks. Left before dinner, refusing payment. Call me if things heat up, he said. Handing Robert a plain white card with just a phone number and handwritten, ask for Dan. After he left, Martha stood at the sink washing the glasses. He didn't say we'd win, she said, not turning around. No, Robert said, stacking the folder back into the oilcloth. He said we're right. That's different. They decided to reach out quietly, not with accusations. With questions, Robert called Frank, the retired engineer, 2 lots down. They'd fished together for years, shared tools, commiserated over stubborn lawnmowers. Frank answered on the second ring, voice warm but wary. Robert, everything okay? Yeah, just curious. You still got your closing documents? From when you bought in? A beat thinks so. Why humor me? Look at the legal description. See if it says anything about the lake. High water mark. Riparian rights. Silence. Then the sound of a drawer opening. Pages shuffling. Hang on. Yeah, here it is. Lot 38, including all land to the ordinary high water mark of Clearwater Lake. With full riparian rights. Same wording.
Roberts.
Throat tightened. Frank, did anyone ever tell you that meant you didn't own the shore? A dry laugh. Nope. I built my dock in '83, paid the permit fee to the county $25 and a site plan. Never heard a peep from the HOA till last month. Same here. Another pause. Longer this time? You think they're trying to take it? Frank asked, voice low. I think Robert said they already think they have. They weren't alone. Over the next week, 3 more neighbors came forward, all lakeside lots, all with identical language in their deeds. One woman, widowed 10 years, had her husband's old file box hauled up from the basement. He kept everything, she said, voice thick. Even the receipt for the surveyor's fee. Paid in cash, signed by... Oh, she stopped. Who? Robert asked. H.K. Hayes. A pattern was emerging. Not conspiracy. Not malice, at least. Not yet. Just drift. A slow slide from what was true to what was convenient. Someone, long ago, decided shared access meant shared ownership, and no one corrected them. Meanwhile, the HOA stayed quiet. No more notices. No emails, just silence. It felt heavier than the first threat. Then came the flyer, not official. Not on HOA letterhead. Just a single sheet slipped under windshield wipers at the community mailbox cluster. No signature. No return address. Fairness means shared access. Why should a few control what belongs to all? Our lake. Our rules. Our future, underneath, in smaller print. Over 70% of homeowners support unified lake management. No poll. No names. No proof. Martha found it tucked into her grocery bag when she got home from the store. She didn't say anything. Just handed it to Robert, her face unreadable. That night, they sat on the dock longer than usual. The air was warm, thick with the smell of honeysuckle and damp earth. Crickets hummed. Somewhere across the cove, a loon called, lonely and clear. They didn't talk about the flyer. They talked about their grandson's baseball game last weekend. How he'd struck out twice, then hit a grounder that snuck past third and made it all the way to second. How he'd be so proud when they told him they talked about the tomatoes finally ripening. How Martha was going to make sauce and freeze it in old yogurt containers. Like her mother used to dot small things. Solid. Things because the big thing, the looming thing felt too heavy to hold just then, but it was there. And on June 10th, Tuesday, Robert's phone buzzed just after breakfast, a certified mail alert. He drove to the post office himself. The envelope was thick, heavy paper. HOA logo in the corner. Inside, a letter on crisp white stock, dear property owner. This serves as formal notice that your unpermitted dock structure on Lot 42 violates Article 7, Section 4 of the Willow Creek Estates. Covenants, conditions, and restrictions. You are hereby directed to remove said structure in its entirety. By June 30th, 2021, failure to comply will result in removal by contracted vendor at your expense, plus a lien filed against the property for all associated costs. No extensions will be granted at the bottom. In bold, this decision is final. Robert stood in the kitchen, reading it aloud to Martha. His voice didn't shake, but his hands did. She took the letter, read it herself, then folded it once. Then again, then slid it into the folder with the deed. Final, she said, quiet. Yeah, they really think we'll just take it down. They think we don't have a choice. She looked at him. Not with fear, with something steadier. We do, though, don't we? He thought of Harold, of the iron pin in the ground, of the words carved into the dock post. Truth matters. He nodded. They called Don, not for advice. This time for action. They met in his office's small room above a hardware store. Shelves lined with law books and old topographic maps, a coffee pot gurgling in the corner. No mahogany desks. No leather chairs. Just a sturdy oak table, 3 mismatched chairs, and a window that looked out over the town square. Dan read the letter. Then the deed. Then Frank's copy. Then the field notes. He didn't sigh. Didn't frown. Just took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and said, okay. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a thin blue booklet, State Code. Title 44, Property. He flipped to a section. Underlined years ago in pencil. Riparian rights are property rights. They run with the land. They cannot be extinguished by private agreement unless explicitly conveyed by deed. He tapped the page. They didn't convey it. They assumed it. He looked at them. If we do nothing, they'll come on June 30th with a crew and a bill. And once that dock's gone, it's harder to prove it ever belonged. Courts like facts on the ground. He paused. So we need to get ahead of them. He laid out the plan, simple, but not easy. First, file a quiet title action. Not a lawsuit against the HOA, not yet. Just a request to the court. Please declare, once and for all, who owns what. A legal way of saying, let's settle this before someone tears something down. Second, ask for a temporary order. Stop them from touching the dock until the court decides. Third, gather everything. Every deed. Every tax record. Every old photo of the Laquesta sleigh ones showing docks unchanged for decades. No drama, Dan said. No accusations. Just facts. Paper and land and law. Robert and Martha looked at each other. This wasn't just about a dock anymore. It was about principle, but it was also about cost. Time, stress. We can't afford a big fight. Martha said softly. Dan shook his head. You're not paying me to fight. You're paying me to prevent a fight. This filing? It's modest. And if we win, and we should, the court can order them to cover your costs. That's the law, too. He smiled faintly. Sometimes the best way to protect your home is to stand in the doorway and say, let's talk first, before anyone kicks it in. They signed the papers the next day, not with fanfare, not with anger, at Dan's kitchen table, because his office, printer jam-dammed over slices of peach pie Martha had brought. Just 3 people, a notary stamp, and the weight of something old being honored. The filing went to the courthouse by noon. 2 days later, they got the hearing date. June 22nd, 8 days before the HOA's deadline. And that's when the other shoe dropped. Not from the HOA, from the courtroom during the emergency. Hearing for the temporary order, the 1-2, stop the dock, removal Dan, presented the deed, the plat amendment, the tax records, the HOA's lawyer. A polished man in a suit too heavy for June didn't argue the documents. Instead, he said something that made Robert's stomach drop. Your Honor, while the deeds contain language referencing the high water mark, no formal survey was ever recorded showing the exact metes and bounds of the lake boundary. It's ambiguous. And for over 30 years, the HOA has openly, notoriously, and exclusively controlled the lake, maintaining it, regulating access, bearing the cost and liability. Paused. That, he said, sounds like adverse possession. The room didn't gasp, but it got quieter. Robert didn't know the term, but he knew the feeling. It was the same one he'd had as a kid. Watching a neighbor slowly mow a foot deeper into his family's pasture each spring until one day the fence was just gone. If you ignore it long enough, it becomes theirs. Martha's hand found his under the table. Cold. Dan didn't flinch. Adverse possession requires hostile possession, meaning without the owner's permission. But the lot owners allowed shared access. That's not hostility. That's hospitality. You can't steal a right by being invited to use it. The judge, a woman with silver hair and no-nonsense glasses, listened, took notes, asked a few sharp questions. Then she looked at the HOA's lawyer. Do you have a single deed? She asked. A single recorded document where the lake or the shoreline was conveyed to the HOA. He hesitated. No, Your Honor. But the covenants don't transfer title, she interrupted gently. They regulate use. There's a difference. She turned to Dan. I'll grant the temporary restraining order. The dock stays. For now, relief washed over Robert, so strong it made him dizzy. But the judge wasn't done. She looked at the HOA's lawyer again. If, at the summary judgment hearing, you still cannot produce a deed, a quitclaim, any instrument of conveyance, this case won't go to trial. She'll let that hang. Then, just before gaveling the hearing closed, she added, almost as an afterthought, also, who's H.K. Hayes? Dan smiled. The original surveyor, Your Honor, deceased. But we may have something of his. The courtroom emptied slowly. Outside, the sun was blinding. Robert blinked, breathing in the hot asphalt smell. They'd bought time, but the real work was just beginning, because now they had to prove not just that they were right, but that the truth hadn't been buried. Somewhere. In a county vault, in a box no one had opened in 40 years. There had to be a piece of paper that settled it. Harold would have filed it. He always did. Robert looked at Martha. She nodded. Let's go find it, just like that, quietly. Stubbornly, the search began. Not with lawyers. Not with protests. With a car, a thermos of coffee. And the memory of a man who believed that if you put the truth down on paper and filed it where it belonged, it would still be there when the world finally came looking, even if it took decades. Even if no one remembered to ask. The county records office in Willow Creek was neat, air-conditioned, and on most days empty. Fluorescent lights hummed. A ceiling fan turned lazily. The clerk, a woman with kind eyes and reading glasses on a beaded chain, recognized Robert and Martha. Not from the HOA Dramono. One had said a word about that. But from years of stopping by to check property lines before planting trees or building sheds. Good folks, she'd once told her husband. Ask before they act. But this time, Robert didn't ask for lot for two. He asked for everything on Clearwater Lake. From 1978 to 1985, the clerk didn't blink. Just typed slowly, printed a list, and pointed down the hall. Microfilm rooms open. Machines Finnica press play twice if it stutters. They sat side by side at the dim glow of the reader, the film reels clicking in worry like old home movies. Deeds, plats, zoning petitions, tax rolls. They scrolled through them all, page after page of dense type, faded stamps, handwritten notes in the margins. Most of it matched what they already had. The 1979 plat showing lots, roads, trees, no lake ownership. The 1985 HOA incorporation listing common areas as clubhouse, pool, green spaces. No mention of the lake. The annual tax assessments? Every year, lots 40 through 45 carried the lakefront designation. Higher value, higher taxes. Never challenged, but nothing new. Nothing that shut the door. By noon, their eyes ached. Martha rubbed her temples. Maybe it's not here. Robert rewound the reel slowly. Harold filed things twice. Once in the main office. Once elsewhere. She looked at him. He told me once, Robert said, voice low, that when a developer tried to rush a plat through without full survey, he filed the real one in the next county over, just in case. Martha stared. You're joking. No. Said the clerk there was a friend, and that truth shouldn't rely on one filing cabinet. They packed up, drove 30 miles west, past rolling fields on a roadside stand selling peaches and honey, to Cedar Ridge County. Their office was older. Wood paneling, linoleum floors, the scent of paper and dust and decades. The clerk there, a retired surveyor himself, a volunteering part-time, lit up when Robert said, H.K. Hayes, Clearwater, late 70s. Oh, him, sharp man. He came in person every time. Never mailed anything. Said if it matters, you walk it in. He disappeared into the back. 10 minutes later, he returned with a small cardboard box, labeled tied with twine. Found it in the Surveyor Retention Archive. We keep originals for 50 years, just in case. Inside, 3 folded plat maps, a sheaf of field notes, and tucked in a clear sleeve recording book 1427, page 89. Robert's hands didn't shake this time. He opened it. There it was, not the original. 1979 PLAT, an amendment, dated March 17, 1981, signed by the developer, approved by the County Planning Commission, and in the lower right corner Harold's official seal, crisp and dark hand beside it, in neat blue ink, the county surveyor's initials. And a note, boundary of lots 40 to 45 extends to the 1978 ordinary high water elevation of Clearwater Lake. Okay, USGS gauge number 023115500. Lake bed not included in subdivision. Parian rights, retained by lot owners per state code, section 44-8-1. Martha let out a breath she didn't. Tino she was holding. Robert read it again. Then again, this wasn't interpretation. This was declaration. They made copies, dozens. Had them certified on the spot. The clerk even stamped each one with the county seal himself. For peace of mind, he said, driving home the car felt different. Lighter, not because the fight was over, far from it, but because the ground beneath them had solidified. They weren't guessing anymore. They knew. Back home, they spread the new documents across the kitchen table. Dan came that evening, not summoned, just showed up, like he sensed the shift. He read the 1981 amendment slowly, his finger tracing each line. Then he looked up and smiled. Not big, but deep. That, he said, is the nail in the coffin. He added it to the court file, filed a supplement, sent a copy not aggressively, just factually to the HOA's lawyer. No note. No taunt. Just the truth on paper. And then? They waited. But the story didn't stay in the courtroom. It spilled out quietly, steadily into the neighborhood. Frank was the first to stop by, not to ask for help. To offer it, he brought his own 1982 closing packet and a thermos of strong tea. Read the amendment, he said, made copies for 3 others. They're rattled. Not at you, at them. He nodded toward the clubhouse. Turns out a lot of folks never read the covenants. He just signed at closing and moved on. Then came the woman from Lot 40, soft-spoken, in her 70s, widowed 5 years. She brought a shoebox full of old photos. Here was one from 1986. Kids splashing off her dock, towels on the grass, a picnic basket open. No HOA signs. No permits visible. Another from 92. a community fishing derby hosted by the lakeside lot owners, with the HOA providing lemonade and paper plates. They thanked us, she said, voice trembling just a little, for letting everyone use the water. Now they're saying we stole it? A retired teacher from Lat 39 started a quiet email chain, not confrontational, just factual. Here's what my deed says. Here's the 1981 amendment. Here's the tax record. Anyone else want to compare? Within a week, 12 lakeside owners had shared their documents. It's all identical. The narrative shifted. It wasn't us versus them anymore. It was what's true versus what's been said. And people began to wonder if they got this wrong. What else is wrong? The flyers stopped. The anonymous notes vanished. Even the HOA's usual chatter garden tips, lost pets, garage sale alerts fell silent on the neighborhood app. An uneasy calm settled over Willow Creek, like the quiet before a storm, breaks sore before the air finally clears. Then, 2 days before the summary judgment hearing, the president resigned. Not with a statement. It's not with a meeting. Just a short email to the board. Due to unforeseen personal circumstances, I am stepping down effective immediately. Thank you for the opportunity to serve. No explanation. No farewell. The vice president, a quiet man who ran a hardware store and rarely spoke at meetings, took over. His first act. Emailing Dan, the board would like to review all evidence prior to the hearing. Can we arrange a time to discuss? Not fight. Discuss, a small word, but it felt like a door creaking open. Robert and Martha didn't celebrate. They made soup not because they were happy, though a little hope had taken root, but because that's what you do when the world shifts. You tend to the ordinary. Martha chopped carrots. Robert stirred the pot. The radio played a folk song, soft and steady. Later on the dock, they sat as the sun dipped behind the pines. No grand speeches, just the water lapping. Then Martha said, "Remember when we first moved here, that first winter? The ice on the lake was so thick we walked all the way to the middle." Robert smiled. "You were terrified. I was not. I held your arm the whole time. You squeezed so hard I lost feeling in my fingers." They laughed, not loud, but real. And in that moment, it wasn't about deeds or courts or covenants. It was about this, the quiet life they'd built. The trust that the ground beneath them, both literal and the kind you can't see, was solid. The hearing was set for Friday. They didn't expect fireworks, but courts, like lakes, can surprise you. The morning of, the courtroom was fuller than last time. Not packed, but present. Frank sat in the second row, a woman from Lot 44. 2 others Robert didn't know but who nodded as he walked in. The judge entered promptly, same silver hair, same no-sense glasses. She nodded at Dan, at the HOA's lawyer. "Let's keep this efficient," she said. "Plaintiff's, your motion for summary judgment is based on recorded title, correct?" Don stood, calm, clear. He walked the court through it, not quickly but carefully. The 1979 deed, the 1981 amended platric, proved, with explicit boundary language, the decades of tax assessments, the absence total, complete of any deed, quitclaim, or conveyance, from the original developer to the HOA, Your Honor, he said. You can't own what was never given to you. The HOA may have managed access, but management is not ownership. Permission is not surrender. Then he sat. The HOA's lawyer stood. He didn't argue the documents this time. Instead, he said, "Your Honor, the board acknowledges the language in the deeds. However, the intent of the original developer and the reasonable reliance of the membership for over 30 years creates an equitable interest. To now strip the community of shared lake access would cause irreparable harm." He paused. And frankly, it would set a dangerous precedent. If one family can claim exclusive control over a natural feature like a lake, where does it end? Murmur soft. But there Robert felt Martha's hand tighten on his. That word exclusive hung in the air like smoke, because that wasn't what they wanted. They never had. Don stood again. Not angry, not defensive. Your Honor, no one is asking for exclusive control. The Hayes have never blocked access, never charged a fee. For 22 years, neighbors have fished from their shore, launched kayaks, walked the path. They're not trying to wall off the lake. They're trying to protect their right to keep it open. He looked at the HOA's lawyer. The danger isn't in upholding the deed. The danger is in ignoring it. Because once you decide that paper, it doesn't matter that intent and reliance can rewrite ownership, then where does it end? What lot is safe? What right is real? He sat. The judge didn't speak for a long moment. She flipped through the exhibits, the 1981 amendment, tax records, Harold's field notes. Then she looked up. "I've reviewed the record," she said. "Psst. And I have one question." She turned to the HOA's lawyer. "In all your research or title review, your comprehensive analysis, did you ever locate a single document where the lake or the shoreline was legally transferred to the HOA?" He shifted, cleared his throat. "No, Your Honor." But her voice wasn't sharp, just final. "You cannot claim ownership of land without proof of ownership. Intent doesn't deed. Reliance doesn't convey.
Ass.
And time, no matter how long, does not erase a right that was never surrendered." She turned to Dan. "I find in favor of the plaintiffs. The motion for summary judgment is granted." A soft exhale moved through the room. She continued. "The court declares that the owners of lots 40 through 45 hold title to the ordinary high water mark of Clearwater Lake, including all riparian rights. The HOA holds no legal interest in the lakebed or shoreline." Then quietly, firmly, the HOA is ordered to cease all enforcement actions related to shoreline structures, to reimburse the plaintiffs for reasonable legal fees, and to post this ruling on its official communications channel within 7 days. She tapped her gavel once. Not loud, just enough to say, "It's done." Outside. The sun was high and warm. No one cheered. No one hugged. Frank clapped Robert on the shoulder once. Solid, the woman from Lot 44 pressed a small jar of homemade blackberry jam into Martha's hands. "From last summer's crop," she said. "Thought you might like it?" They walked to the car in silence. Only when they were inside, doors closed, did Martha lean her head back and close her eyes. "Well," she said, after a long breath, "that happened." Robert started the engine, didn't pull out. "I keep thinking," he said, "about what Harold would have said." Martha opened her eyes, smiled. He'd say, "Told you so." Then he'd ask if we wanted pie. Robert laughed freely, laughed for the first time in months. They drove home the long way past the pasture with the red barn, the bend in the road where the wildflowers grew thickest in June. When they turned onto their street, they saw it at the foot of their driveway, left quietly. Respectfully was a single sunflower, tall, bright yellow, stem wrapped in twine. No note, but they knew it wasn't celebration. It was acknowledgement. A silent thank you from someone who finally saw the line not as a barrier, but as a boundary that made trust possible. That night, they didn't go to the dock. They sat on the back porch. The air was still. Fireflies blinked in the grass. Martha poured 2 glasses of lemonade. Robert reached into his pocket. He placed something small and smooth on the table between them, a river stone flat, gray worn by time and water. He'd picked it up that morning. On the shore near the old sycamore, carved into it, faint but clear. With a pocket knife years ago, HKH. He didn't say anything. Martha picked it up. Ran her thumb over the letters, then she set it gently on the windowsill where the morning light would hit it first. A quiet marker, not of victory, of continuity. Because the real work wasn't over. Now came the harder part. Not proving what was theirs, but figuring out together how to share it, without forgetting the truth that made sharing possible. And as the first stars appeared, one by one, Robert took Martha's hand. No words needed. The lake was still there. The land was still theirs. And for the first time in a long while, the future felt like something they could walk into, not braced for impact, but step by step, sure, dash-footed, like a line drawn long ago. Still holding true, still guiding the way.